this is Jyoti. Let's get into the details. During a recent diplomatic visit to South Korea, US President Donald Trump faced vocal opposition from demonstrators who gathered in various parts of Seoul. The protest, marked by banners and chants, reflected widespread concerns over American foreign policy and its regional implications. While the visit aimed to strengthen bilateral ties, many South Koreans expressed unease about military cooperation and trade negotiations. The demonstrators, comprising civic groups and peace activists, called for a more balanced approach to international relations. Though the rallies remained largely peaceful, they underscored the tension surrounding Trump's presence in the region. The events highlighted a growing divide between official diplomatic efforts and public sentiment regarding US leadership in East Asia. Let's take a look.
However, world leaders and governments are busy flattering Trump and displaying every possible act of diplomatic charm just to persuade him to lower US tariffs by a few percent. In the end, how absurd is it that they speak of international cooperation while each nation scrambles to serve its own interests under US pressure? However, world leaders and governments are busy flattering Trump and displaying every possible act of diplomatic charm just to persuade him to lower US tariffs by a few percent. In the end, how absurd is it that they speak of international cooperation while each nation scrambles to serve its own interests under US pressure? However, world leaders and governments are busy flattering Trump and displaying every possible act of diplomatic charm just to persuade him to lower US tariffs by a few percent. In the end, how absurd is it that they speak of international cooperation while each nation scrambles to serve its own interests under US pressure? However, world leaders and governments are busy flattering Trump and displaying every possible act of diplomatic charm just to persuade him to lower US tariffs.
Amid faltering peace negotiations with Afghanistan, Pakistan's defense minister reportedly accused India of sabotaging the process. Speaking at a press briefing, he claimed that Kabul was acting as a proxy for New Delhi, suggesting that India was using Afghanistan to destabilize Pakistan and derail the peace efforts. The minister expressed frustration over the lack of progress, stating that the talks had collapsed due to external interference. He implied that India's involvement was a deliberate attempt to provoke regional instability and prevent reconciliation between Islamabad and Kabul. His remarks reflect growing tensions in South Asia and highlight Pakistan's attempt to shift blame for the breakdown in diplomacy. The statement has sparked strong reactions across diplomatic circles. Western Jamaica endured a punishing assault of wind and rain as Hurricane Melissa swept the shore with unprecedented force. Making landfall as a Category 5 storm, Melissa carved its name into history as the most powerful hurricane to ever strike the island directly. Communities braced for impact as the storm unleashed destructive gusts and torrential downpours, overwhelming infrastructure and triggering widespread disruptions. Emergency services scrambled to respond while residents sought shelter from the relentless conditions. The scale of the storm's intensity stunned meteorologists and underscored the growing threat of extreme weather in the region. As recovery efforts begin, the nation faces a daunting path forward in the wake of this historic natural disaster.
Power knocked out across the island. The International Federation of the Red Cross said up to 1.5 million people in Jamaica were expected to be directly affected by the storm. Melissa is forecast to remain a major storm as it heads north to Cuba. There, authorities said they had evacuated upwards of 500,000 people from areas vulnerable to winds and flooding. Cuba's president urged people to shelter in safe areas.
We want to stress again how big this event is and the need for people to understand the risk it poses because of its scale. Wind speeds above 260 kilometers per hour can destroy any facility that is not properly prepared.
NHC scientists said that Melissa's slow speed over unusually warm water led
In a sweeping crackdown on organized crime, at least 64 individuals, including 4 police officers, lost their lives during Rio de Janeiro's most lethal police operation to date. The raid aimed at dismantling the notorious Commando Vermelho gang unfolded just days ahead of the city's hosting of high-profile international gatherings linked to the upcoming COP30 climate summit. Authorities deployed over 2,500 personnel in the operation, which also led to dozens of arrests and weapon seizures. The timing of the raid has drawn global attention as Rio prepares for welcome dignitaries and celebrities for climate-focused events like the C40 Mayor Summit and the Earth Short Prize.
Large-scale operations against criminal groups ahead of major events in Rio. The death toll, confirmed by Rio Governor Claudio Castro on Tuesday, was more than twice the city's most deadly previous police operation. The massive operation involved 2,500 security personnel across 2 favela complexes near the city's international airport. Rio's favelas are poor, densely populated settlements woven through the city's hilly oceanside terrain. The governor confirmed 81 arrests, and authorities are looking to serve 250 arrest and search warrants. Civil society groups have criticized the heavy casualties. At least
a fragile ceasefire in Gaza faced a devastating blow as Israeli strikes killed at least 60 people, many of them children, according to local hospital officials. The attacks launched overnight targeted multiple residential areas, with the bodies arriving at hospitals such as Nasser al-Awda and Aqsa late Tuesday. The strikes followed the death of an Israeli soldier, prompting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to order powerful retaliation. Despite the escalation, U.S. President Donald Trump insisted the truce would hold. The violence marks the most severe breach since the ceasefire began 2 weeks ago, raising fears of renewed conflict. Rescue teams continued to search through rubble as international observers expressed concern over the mounting civilian toll. Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan cast her vote in the country's presidential and legislative elections, aiming to secure a second term. Observers noted that her main challengers had either been jailed or disqualified from contesting, raising concerns over the fairness of the electoral process. Reports indicated that Hassan was looking to consolidate her position, while critics argued that the absence of viable opposition undermined democratic credibility. Human rights groups expressed alarm over the political climate, citing intimidation and restricted freedoms despite initial hopes for reform. Analysts suggested that the ruling party's dominance remained unchallenged. Hassan's administration was said to be continuing practices that silenced dissent, leaving voters with limited choices at the ballot box.
pawe wazi kabisa, usionekane mwisho kabisa kwenye kona kule, uwe shuka chini kwanza.
President Donald Trump arrived in South Korea for the concluding leg of his Asia tour, expressing optimism about easing trade tensions with China after holding summit talks with the South Korean President Lee Jae-myung. Trump was said to be hopeful that discussions with the Chinese President Xi Jinping would lead to a breakthrough in the ongoing trade war. Officials accompanying him indicated that the U.S. administration viewed the meetings as a strategic opportunity to stabilize economic relations in the region. The visit to South Korea was also seen as a reaffirmation of bilateral ties with both leaders, reportedly discussing regional security and economic cooperation ahead of Trump's anticipated engagement with the Chinese leadership.
Trump was also set for talks with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung to discuss crucial security and trade issues. The two allies announced a deal in late July under which Seoul would avoid the worst of the tariffs by agreeing to pump $350 billion of new investments into the United States. But talks over the structure of those investments have been deadlocked.
Our deal with the Republic of Korea will be finalized very soon, like moments or very shortly thereafter. These agreements will be incredible victories for all of us because everyone is better off when we have stable partnerships not plagued by chronic problems and imbalances.
South Korea's President Lee awarded Trump the country's highest decoration, the Grand Order of Mugunghwa, according to Lee's office, that recognizes Trump's role as a peacemaker. Lee also presented the U.S. leader with a replica of an ancient gold crown. As Trump arrived in Gyeongju, demonstrators gathered to criticize his visit and his welcome by other national leaders. Over the weekend, around 1,000 South Korean protesters also gathered in central Seoul to voice their opposition to Trump. Ahead of his arrival, North Korea said via state media that it had test-fired a nuclear-capable cruise missile to the west of the Korean peninsula the day before. Trump's visit to South Korea is the final stop of his trip to Asia. He announced a slew of trade agreements on the sidelines of the 11-member Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit in Malaysia, and also oversaw the signing of an expanded truce between Thailand and Cambodia over a border conflict. In Tokyo on Tuesday, Trump lavished praise on Japan's first female Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi. Donald Trump landed in South Korea on Wednesday for the final.
Centuries-old landmarks in Hue, Vietnam's former imperial capital and a UNESCO World Heritage Site, have been inundated by floodwaters following record-breaking rainfall across the central coastal region. Over 1,085 millimeters of rain fell in just 24 hours, Vietnam's highest ever, causing the Perfume River to swell to 4.62 meters and submerge much of the city. Streets turned into waterways, with the residents and tourists navigating waist-deep brown water by boat. The deluge also affected nearby Hue and another historic town, prompting mass evacuations and power outages. Authorities report over 1 lakh homes flooded and widespread damage to crops and infrastructure. With a more rain forecast, Vietnam's disaster agency remains on high alert. Authorities in Lahore, Pakistan have launched anti-smog guns to combat rising air pollution ahead of the winter smog season. These machines spray fine water mist into the air to trap dust and particulate matter. Aiming to reduce toxic pollutants, Lahore, often ranked as the world's most polluted megacity, faces severe smog due to industrial emissions, vehicle exhaust and crop burning. The Punjab government has deployed these guns in high-risk zones and plans to expand the initiative. Officials hope this technology will improve air quality and reduce health risks for residents. However, experts caution that long-term solutions require stricter emissions control and sustainable urban planning.
मुझे तो अभी से खांसी है जब
PM10 जो फ्यूजिटिव डस्ट है उसको जब हम ये मिस्ट करना ऑपरेशन करते हैं तो ये कम्प्लीटली उसको शटर डाउन कर रही है। इसका हमने टेक्निकल एनालिसिस और एक्सपेरिमेंट भी किया। काना में आज से एक हफ्ता पहले जो AQI था उसके अंदर PM10 की रेशियो 670 के करीब थी। फिर उसके बाद हमने वहाँ पर एंटी स्मोक गन्स की डिप्लॉयमेंट की और बिफोर एंड आफ्टर का जब हमने रीडिंग से डाटा निकाला तो PM10 की रेशियो 670 से हम 170 पे ले आए थे।
California, joined by 22 other states and 3 governors, has filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, and Secretary Brooke Rollins for suspending Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program (SNAP) benefits amid a federal government shutdown. Attorney General Rob Bonta alleges the USDA unlawfully halted food aid for over 41 million low-income Americans, including 5.5 million Californians, despite having access to $6 billion in contingency funds. The lawsuit filed in Massachusetts argues that the USDA has both the authority and legal obligation to use these reserves to maintain SNAP payments through September 2026. This marks the first time in the program's history that benefits have been delayed due to a shutdown. Plaintiffs are demanding an immediate restoration of funding to prevent widespread food insecurity.
Will withhold all November benefit payments. Trump and Rollins are cutting off benefits for more than 41 million Americans. 41 million Americans, red states and blue states. Folks who rely on SNAP to put food on the table, even though there are billions of dollars in contingency funds and other funds that could be used to provide SNAP benefits during the shutdown. They are doing this on purpose. It is deliberate. It is intentional. They have the funds. They're just not using them. Trump and his administration are willing to put more than 41 million Americans at risk of hunger, at risk of food insecurity, at risk of malnutrition, if it gives them a new play in their twisted political game. They are playing politics while Americans go hungry.
I mean, enough of this. Cruelty is the policy. That's what this is about. It's intentional cruelty, intentionally creating anxiety.
I'm going to kick it off here today to announce California's latest lawsuit against the federal government, and specifically the U.S. Department of Agriculture, also known.
Israeli military officials allege that Hamas staged the recovery of hostage Ophir Sharvitz remains in Gaza, according to the IDF. Surveillance footage showed militants digging up the body in a choreographed manner, which they claimed was intended to mislead the public and manipulate global perception. The officials stated that the act was not a genuine recovery, but a propaganda effort designed to distort the narrative surrounding the hostages' fate. They emphasized that such tactics violated humanitarian norms and showcased Hamas's use of psychological warfare. The video, this said, was released to expose what they described as deliberate misinformation by the militant group. Diplomatic sources reported that peace talks between Afghanistan and Pakistan held in Istanbul concluded without any agreement. Officials from both sides were said to have expressed their frustration over unresolved issues, particularly concerning border security and militant activity. Observers noted that despite initial optimism, the negotiations stalled due to deep-rooted mistrust and conflicting demands. Afghan representatives reportedly accused Pakistan of failing to act against cross-border insurgents, while Pakistani officials were said to have criticized Afghanistan's lack of cooperation. Mediators involved in the discussions acknowledged that the talks had reached a deadlock. With no clear path forward, the outcome was described as a setback for regional stability and future diplomatic engagement. That's the wrap of the world news. For more updates, stay tuned to CVR News English.